Kenneth Waltz, a scholar of political science trained by the Zambian School of Economics, one time had this to say, and I quote, that the global stage is in fact a self-help system, and perhaps rightly so. The 19th century, the globe found itself having two world wars, World War I and World War II. You may recall the Peloponnesian War. Well, the globe has found itself at conflict at several instances. And even if you break it down to our local context here in Africa, you know that Kinshasa has on several instances accused Kigali and Kampala of aiding the conflict in Goma, that is Western Congo. But well, today shall focus on Russia, Ukraine. That in this day and era, we still have countries committing, what you would call unprecedented acts of aggression against sovereign states. So we're here to evaluate how do countries or nations find themselves at conflict with one another, but also how do some cooperate. Viewers, welcome to this episode of the Youth Roundtable. And of course, I'm joined by a panel of immaculate young people. That is now my pleasure to introduce to you, and in no particular order. From the extreme left is a civil rights lawyer, and the first you've seen on this show before, Isaac Kwagala. Ndugu, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
How do you feel?
Good. How are you today?
I'm okay. I'm well. Yeah, the gentleman in the middle is Ivan Sssegawa Sebastian, the East African Youth Ambassador Emeritus. Seba, thank you for being here.
Pleasure is always mine to be here. I'm very excited to undertake this conversation today.
Yeah, and we are very happy to have you.
Thank you.
Next to Sebastian, and the only lady on the show is Denise Karungi. Denise is a lawyer, but also I know that she has interest in writing and authoring interesting documentations. Denise is the first time on the show, and we are glad to have her. Denise, karibu.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and have a fruitful dialogue.
Thank you. Next to myself is Carlos Ogik. Carlos is also a lawyer, but also a political analyst. But know that he has interest in areas of international relations and also human rights. Ogik, it's always a pleasure to have you.
First, I appreciate that. I would like to remind you that next time you should start with protocol, welcoming ladies first. Yeah, but I appreciate being here.
Yeah.
I am looking forward to having a wonderful debate with this wonderful panel.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Well, just to kick us right away I'll give you the opportunity, Council. I don't know, how do countries find themselves at conflict? Are there certain underlying factors? Because we would imagine that we are in an era of interdependency, an era where human rights values seem to be very prominent. How does a country find itself committing in broad daylight acts of aggression against another sovereign state?
Thank you, Ndugu Kidega. Ideally, countries are supposed to coexist in an environment of harmony, or what we call peaceful coexistence with each other. But owing to a multiplicity of factors, countries are then bound to, have confrontations. For example, if a country feels like its strategic interests are being violated by another country, then it becomes very apparent a likelihood of conflict strongly emerges. And we've had a variety of examples in the world history. If I'm to take you back to, for example, the period now preceding the Cold War.
Yeah.
We had the two great wars, the world wars, World War I, World War II, and they were precipitated by one country violating either individually or collectively the interests of other countries. World War I was initiated on account of what in Europe they call the balance of power. The balance of power speaks to a situation whereby there should be no single country having the dominance over a collection of other countries in Europe. So there was need to check the emergent power of Germany, and because Germany felt violated, when it was defeated in World War One. So there was increasing need for it to, some sort of avenge itself, and that precipitated the Second World War. But now, to put the situation in context, the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, I'll say this as a Democrat and a pacifist that, quite frankly speaking, Russia's campaign of military adventurism and malign activity in Ukraine is an unmistakable act of aggression against a sovereign country and her people. There is no question that Russia has committed very egregious, human rights violations in Ukraine. And in my view, there is no justification whatsoever for this. But again, to take you back to some of the causes for this, aggression, I think Russia has found it extremely difficult to come to terms with the current reality that the era of, colonial imperialism is long gone. Russia has always been a global power. Just after the Second World War, we had a new world order, and Russia metamorphosed with, of course, the unification of the other countries, especially in the eastern sphere of the world. They formed what is called as the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So with that dominance and military might, it sought to directly challenge the United States together with its other Western powers, who are what we call today as the victor powers of the Second World War. So with the collapse of the USSR in 1991, I think Russia has come to a point where it wants to alter the course of history to revive that past glory. So I think it's on a campaign of expansionism by launching the military, intervention in Ukraine, but which is unprovoked and unjustified by any measure. So for me, I stand to, in the current agent era, to condemn such an act of, an attack on a country's sovereignty and independence. And I think the world should really consider taking strong initiative, not only to denounce such an action, but also to try and see how they can mediate as between these two conflicting parties, the parties to the conflict. But ultimately, Russia should take ultimate responsibility for the destruction, the loss of life, and any other, associated, problem that could arise from that conflict. If anything, it should pay reparations to the Ukrainian state and her people for the loss. Yeah.
Well, we shall evaluate much more later the mischief behind President Putin, because we also have to understand the role of NATO in all this. That is Russia just a warmonger of the sort, or there are certain inspiring factors? But maybe much more later. I want to bring in Seba. Seba, after World War I, the students of Oxford University in that debate union agreed that they will never be a part of any war that is anchored on individual motives, but also even if to fight for their country, because they had seen the gross effects of the World War I. And Hitler took this literally. He said that, democracies are weak and therefore people can be overrun and will not easily sort of retaliate. And therefore he threw the world into World War II. And the same students who had said that they would not fight found themselves at the front line. The point is, could Russia have imagined that they would easily overrun Ukraine and therefore thought that, this will be a 1-2 weeks thing and we are done with it, but only to meet all this level of resistance? Does this speak to the growing need for what you'd call multipolar systems and not hegemonies, like he was trying to say?
All right. Thank you so much, Kidega, and thank you so much, Senior Counsel, for that very insightful history lesson. I learned quite a lot as a person. But when we speak to, first of all, individuals, I think we need to come to a realization that however much someone might swear to how much they may hate their country, but when it comes to protecting it, you will find that there is always that patriotic instinct that will kick in. So it is no shock
No brainer.
that the same is happening in Ukraine. But when it comes to wars and countries specifically evading other countries, I don't think that that is something that is new even for the 21st century. We have seen America having boots on ground in Afghanistan. Depending on where you are, you can call the Israel-Palestine war inter-country or, intra-country. You've already mentioned about the aggression and sabotage accusations that are happening within our very East African region. You would imagine that at the level we are at now, with elements that we have put in place, systems that are supposed to check the hegemons that he's talking about, the United Nations, the Security Council, you would imagine that we should not find ourselves in such positions. Of course, I can't mention about occupation that is illegal without mentioning what America did to Libya. Very unfortunate. But moving forward about this war specifically, I think that, and I will speak from an African perspective, and this is something, it's not every day that African young people celebrate their leaders, but at least I need to commend our leaders on how they have handled this aggression. That you'll even remember, I think it was a resolution in the UN Security Council where they wanted to call out Russia, and you realize that majority of African countries were silent. They abstained from taking that forward. What that speaks to then is the realization that we have all been trying to avoid, that first, international law is soft power, and it is always at the mercy of the people that have to implement it, which are the partner states. But also that sovereignty is something so strong. That is something that we need to appreciate, because as you can see now, no one is doing anything because two sovereign states are at it. But then the last thing that I think is also critical is something that you said, I think, as a rejoinder to his submission, is the place of the rest of the world in this war. That as much as people might interpret Russia as someone who is going into territory and invading, but they also have their claims around NATO, being aggressive, coming too close to their borders. They probably have their reasons. And I think you guided well. That is maybe a conversation for another day. But for me, what I think now is, and in lieu with your question, is what lessons do we draw as global citizens in the 21st century? We should definitely know that everything we do has repercussions. And with what we are seeing now, there is never an end to how far things can go. It's not that things can just go and you say we have a diplomatic out. It's not that things can go and you say, no, let us maybe just throw in one bomb. We have seen capital cities being taken to ground. We have seen residential houses being bombed. We have seen schools and recreational parks under fire, which means that no one is safe in such a situation. And that definitely is a reflection on how much we need to learn as society, first on how to live with our neighbors, but most importantly, on how to prepare for such situations. I mean, Kiev today has sirens that go off. They have underground bunkers. What does that say about the African cities? Are we able to withhold that fire when it comes our way, and it is airstrikes? Do we have that mechanism in place, to safeguard us? Because we have seen now it is possible. The war can come to your door.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Very brilliant analysis right there. Denise, Karungi, there is something called the just war doctrine, that at times it is just to go to war. And there is a very controversial statement I've come across by one Australian writer called Hedley Bull. He said that at times you must go to war for peace to be sustained. So I don't know, does the Russia-Ukraine incident fit in that just war doctrine? Is it a just war, or it is completely out of the democratic principles? It is completely against humanitarian values. It's completely against international law. I don't know. How do you perceive this?
Oh, thank you. For the record, I'm not pro-Russia. I sympathize with Ukraine. But I would like to disagree with something Sebastian said. I believe that international law is actually strong. It is not weak in, in its principles, but the issue is the reluctance of it to indulge is because there are 5 permanent members of the UN: UK, USA, Russia, France, and China. So if superpowers are at play, then the United Nations Security Council can only work theoretically. You've heard of how Putin approached the council before he actually resumed the war last year. So for him, those are precautions that he took as per the UN Charter. So for the UN Security Council not to further implement its law means that, one, they're actually reluctant to indulge in the conflict. Yes? But again, there was a justification given by Russia because for them, their first reason was they have a right to self-defense. So the right to self-defense basically in international law is you can either act collectively or you can individually. And in Russia's defense, you remember the eastern part of Ukraine had 2 states that were pro-Russia. That was the LPR and DPR. I think Luhansk and yes, that one. So once these 2 states were recognized by Russia as sovereign states, Russia saw that as a go-ahead to actually further its aggressions on Ukraine because, one, the principle of sovereignty is vital, but then what Russia does not understand is that there is something called territorial integrity. So if one UN member state acknowledges the sovereignty of 2 states, yes, that is not enough quorum for a country to actually pursue its interests. Yes. So for me, I would like to believe, and actually strongly based on international law principles, that the issue of sovereignty is something that is very crucial because we've seen states saying they are independent and sovereign, but it comes back to the boundaries. How independent are you territorially? Yes. So the interests that Russia has in Ukraine and vice versa are actually the gist of this conflict. So until the weak justification given by Russia is actually challenged and adopted by the UN Security Council, one, I think their collective self-defense will actually still come into play because in their defense, as long as I notify the Security Council, then I have a go-ahead, And secondly, they also stated that it was a preemptive measure because what threatened them most was Ukraine wanting to join NATO. So for them, Russia in its defense saw this as an attack on its military supremacy. Capitalist nations would of course be able to equip Ukraine. So if a state is intimidated and they are trying to preempt their attack on their supremacy and resources, I think that is not justifiable enough for you to, say I'm acting in collective self-defense and, it's like a reason for us to go to war. Of course, I'm alive to the fact that there's been diplomacy. There was the Minsk Protocol, but that sadly collapsed because the rationale was to get Ukraine, have some constitutional reforms, and then get Ukraine and Russia to agree on withdrawing from the front lines. But then you realize that both nations did not actually adhere to the protocol. Because in my view, I feel like it gave Ukraine enough time to prepare its military forces, to recruit more. No, I'm serious. The fact that the protocol took close to 5 months with little or no implementation between the 2 countries, that was the whole sense of the diplomacy. For me, it gave Ukraine enough time to prepare military, and financially. And then it also gave Russia the false hope that they will actually adhere to their influence. You get? So Russia felt belittled when Ukraine was like, look, the protocol says this, but it still undermines what we actually want. So that's what pushed the 2 states, LPR and DPR, to actually fight for their sovereignty. And once Russia saw that their pro-Russian, states are sovereign, then they felt like they can actually fully resume the war. So in my view, international law principles are at play, yes, but it comes back to the fear that the United Nations actually has for its 5 permanent members. Yes, if it was another member state that was involved, then you probably hear of a case in the ICJ or in the ICC. They would actually prosecute such states. But
We actually have one with the ICC. Sorry for the interruption.
No, it's okay.
Your
Yeah.
country.
I know for Putin.
It's a guilty party.
yeah, but my point is the international institutions are also perplexed, you know. This is where the International Court of Justice steps in, you know, because it has expanded. Yeah. But if it has failed to do so, and yet it was quick to resolve the Nicaragua versus USA war. Yes. So it defeats the whole essence of independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity. So until those 3 are actually acknowledged and implemented by the various bodies under the UN Charter, then I don't think diplomacy is an alternative here, because we've seen the Minsk Protocol failing. Then there was a Franco-German plan that also came into play, but Ukraine and Russia could not agree. So for me...
So then when you throw diplomacy out of the window, then what option is left?
There are so many options, because diplomacy is one of them. Yes, there is also mediation. If member states would actually get involved, yeah, he was giving a point of the fact that African states have handled the situation well, but I think it's inadequate. We realize that the impact is not yet here, but it will actually get here.
It is here already.
Exactly.
partly.
Yes,
But it's shocking. I mean, not everyone is actually alive to the fact that, you know, the conflict keeps intensifying. I mean, people would rather be in sheer ignorance because they don't care. Yeah. But from his history, realize that all the world wars had an adverse impact on Africa.
Yeah.
So if even the minor member states, I don't want to say minor because
No, all states are.
yes, all states have equal. Exactly.
She's
Thank
using
you.
the animal farm thing.
It would actually come into play. But anyway, to sum it up, war is never justification to do anything, because it defeats the whole essence of international law, international humanitarian law, and that is why I would like to blame the institutions that are supposed to ensure that states follow the means provided in the charter. You know, if it's diplomacy, and if it fails, you know, you have like 1, 2, 3 options before you actually lodge a full-scale war. So I'm still strongly, you know, in support of international law. I'm sorry, Sebastian.
Okay.
But,
No. That's entirely at your discretion. There is no need for you to apologize to Seba. That is your opinion, and rightly so. Carlos, hearing from the 2 gentlemen and the ladies that you appreciate the fact that there is more than meets the eye, that there are other underlying factors. She brought in the aspect of NATO, and you know that at times good fences make good neighbors.
True.
So if you have NATO very close to your border through Ukraine, then I think it's only right for you to, you know, try to look out for yourself. But anyway, what do you make of this?
I think, thank you. I appreciate the submission of these colleagues, and I can say I have a lot of agreement and disagreement with each of them. And if you might give me that time, I
Sure,
would start
time
with
is yours.
my colleague. He gave us a very one-sided sort of analysis on how the war started. And you gave us the reasons why you think Russia should not have done what it is doing. And history will judge us wrong if we forget so much that these similar incidents that Russia is doing now actually occurred before. For example, we have seen atrocities in Yemen. My brother here was mentioning so many of them in Israel, in Afghanistan, here in Africa, we saw it in Libya. At that point, who was the instigator of the entire? Okay? And at what point did the international community react to that? So, at what point also do we draw the attention to say, this is a wrong act and this is a good one? I am a sports fan. During the time that the US was busy in Yemen and all that, I remember there was a sports personnel who tried to do a celebration by removing a shirt, and there was a written message saying, stop the war in Yemen. And later on, FIFA itself came out to call upon him to say, don't mix politics with football. Now, right now, we are seeing a war in Ukraine.
They disqualified Russia.
You see, they are wearing armbands that have Ukraine flags.
Yeah.
You see Russia being disqualified from sports. You see maybe, for example, Ukrainian players being given a certain level of attention. Like, now, this is the hypocrisy of the international community. That's one point. The second thing I want us to look at is international community is no playground for morality. Okay? Morality in the international community does not exist. Why? We are living in an international security dilemma, in a state of anarchy. Anarchy meaning there is no central government. So no central government leaves the international community with the authority for you to act on your own, and also the ability for you to act depends on how strong you are. That is your case. Now, the other point that maybe you didn't bring out, why did Russia actually go and attack Ukraine? In 2015, minus 2014, Russia going to Crimea. In 2015, there was an agreement that Russia actually tried to come out with its neighboring communities. Poland, we're talking Belarus, we're talking those other countries. Now, they had an agreement that was supposed to come into force to create a free trade area. So that free trade area was meant to promote good relations. But we're talking about two countries that are the biggest in Europe, okay? Russia is the biggest country in Europe, followed by Ukraine. So, which country has the biggest border with Russia? It is Ukraine. Now, let's also not forget, history will tell us that during the World War actually 1 and 2, the biggest attacks on Russia actually came through Ukraine borders. So if it came through Ukraine borders, is Russia wrong to defend its territories through Ukraine? That is one point. Now, if Russia is defending that through Ukraine, Ukraine is expressing interest in joining the arch rival of Russia, which is NATO. Russia left NATO around 2021, if I'm remembering my history well, when around 8 delegates of Russia were dismissed, and then Putin decided to withdraw the entire mission. That is the point at which the level of communication and even relationship between the two became a tatters. So at that point, Russia now has that fear, like he said at some point, that how do you admit your enemy to come very close to your border and insert its missiles facing you? And at the same time, history has already told you that that is the same border that has hurt your country very much. That is one point. So also, Ukraine, when Russia brought that, it's called Eurasian, is it economic union, something like that. The Eurasians, first of all the countries in the region allowed to join. Ukraine refused because of Ukraine's now started, let me say, bromance or romance with the NATO community. So what does Ukraine have that Russia could benefit from? One, the border, the territory. Two, the population of Ukraine being the second biggest country in Europe. That could be a platform for market when you're creating a free trade area. And then the other one we're talking about is Ukraine. You look at things like wheat, they are producing resources. The prices have been hitting us here in Africa just because of the war in Ukraine. So Russia feels like it has lost something. So leave alone the Donetsk and all those days, there was a referendum that was carried on, and you saw how landslide those countries were actually voting. These two countries share history. The history is, like here in Africa, who are the people who divided the grounds anyway? You find that it's the colonialists. Did they consider factors like maybe you find a family in Uganda, but they have their relatives in Rwanda? They have a common language, they have a common origin. So Russia is not wrong to have Ukraine on its side, but I disagree with the approach they have used. Coming to my sister's submission, I agree with her a lot, but there is a principle under international law. You talked of sovereignty, but still takes us back to the anarchy at the international level. Everyone who has done international law has probably faced the question of is international law? Isn't that the first question you always ask? So for me, I have always been on the other side of thinking it's not law, because the respect of international law is dependent on how strong a nation is.
True.
If a nation is very weak, Uganda, why doesn't Uganda have a say to sit Russia and Ukraine down and say, you two, stop fighting? Because Uganda has no strength. And Africa itself, you see, US right now, they're planning to parade their vice president within Africa. She's going to come to Tanzania. Like
Ghana,
now, they're trying to
Zambia.
ask countries, which side are you? Now, for us, Africa, as Africa, we are only left with the choice to choose a side. So it's either you're with or against. Now, the last point which I want to think of is the motivation. There are certain factors that motivate nations to go into a war. Strategic factors, for example. If you allow your enemy to come very close to you, what is your security? America is a very big hypocrite. For me, I'm saying this point blank as it is. America goes around preaching to nations how to behave. America goes around to preach its own morals and enforce it on nations. But when the same nation or maybe another nation tries to do the same, it becomes it's an illegality, maybe it's immoral. In Uganda here, we're suffering with our law that we are about to pass possibly, and they're telling us how that is a violation, but then they don't know that whether that is something we agree with in our culture or not. So we're dealing with two contrasting sides, hypocrites, and you're also dealing with the realists. So the realists want to do the things in the hard way, that is Putin. Then the hypocrites, they hide behind liberalism, but they want to paint themselves as the honest ones. So in my conclusion, my brother, I think this war is justifiable from each side. If you look at it from a Ukrainian aspect, you will see that Ukraine may be aligning with a Russian arch enemy. While they well know that doing this actually would lead them to a mischief, I could call it. Maybe they were counting on, but they were
They had
lucky.
it coming, eh?
Yeah, they have faced it. So if they were members of NATO, maybe we would have seen Article 5 of the NATO, is it that charter? Yeah, they would have triggered Article 5, which provides for maybe an attack on one, an attack on all. But also Article 4 of that same provision talks of maybe if a member country, this is where Ukraine tries to lie, which is still not consistent. Article 4 says maybe if you are you feel there is a threat of violence from any other country that is a non-member of the 29 members of NATO or 30, then there you can call upon other countries to call, but still it does not qualify. So where is Ukraine? Where is Russia? These are now isolated entities. I think this is how I want to serve you.
Wow, this is so complex and so and so interesting. Yeah, but Isaac, people have said that we are in a global village, but my own opinion is that we are many villages around the globe. The point is that you look at how the world is interconnected through, for example, technology and media, is that the Russia-Ukraine war, actually, many have said that it was won or it was begun on the media. That the hypocrisy that he talks about is being anchored on the aspect of media. That you see the way Russia is being portrayed by certain media platforms. They are being portrayed as a villain and as someone who has done the worst thing ever. But those who are orchestrating that kind of media propaganda have in fact done worse. So just help us evaluate two things: the role of media in all this, but also the aspect of, League of Nations was formed as a result of World War I, that there was need for a collective security agenda. States were fighting each other, so there was need for us to have control centralized. So do you think that the United Nations is failing at its work?
Firstly, I want to correct a factual wrong that my brother here stated. He seems to imply that Ukraine is already a member of NATO.
No.
Whereas not, okay. Ukraine, I think, has stated categorically, expressed its interest to ally or join NATO, something that hadn't yet been considered and accepted, and then Russia proceeded to, without justification, invade it. But now, to answer your question, I do not think that media has orchestrated any sort of, propaganda campaign to actually precipitate this war. If anything, Russia should be held fully responsible for, fashioning a propaganda campaign aimed at scapegoating, Ukraine for the need to reassert its imperialistic agenda in the region. I'll tell you this, that the motivation for the West, especially the United States, to intervene in that conflict is to maintain the post-Second World War balance of power. This is something that I made reference to in my opening remarks. You see, the security of Europe is so central to world peace, to the extent that if you are to allow Russia to dominate other states so strongly and allow it to reintroduce its colonial designs and legacy in Europe, then you're going to have anarchy in Europe. You're going to have a destabilized Europe, and with a destabilized Europe, you're going to have a destabilized world, because Europe is the confluence or the epicenter of the world's strategic aims like trade, diplomacy, culture, entertainment, whatnot. So I think the Western Hemisphere is very afraid of Russia having to antagonize that sort of arrangement. Russia has historically been a very belligerent state. It actually, historically, it has annexed territories belonging to the neighbors, the likes of the Belarus, Ukraine itself, all these other small countries, Poland and whatnot. It's just only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 that these countries have had the chance at independence. So they consider it of paramount importance in order for them to ally with the Western powers for their own protection. So Russia should stop scapegoating Ukraine, number one, but also by extension the West for its wrongs in Ukraine, because Ukraine as an independent sovereign state has the capacity to determine its future, you see, without recourse to Russia's viewpoint.
Council, is it peculiar to you that Ukraine finds itself having such a resilient security response towards the Russian invasion? Like, is there anything peculiar about that that shows that Ukraine is perhaps being either supported or the war is actually between Russia and the USA, and Ukraine is only a playfield for that?
It's a proxy.
No, it should be a natural expectation, given the the reality. Like I've said, the interest of the United States and all the other global powers that are allied with the Western Hemisphere is to see that the balance of power in Europe is not tilted in favor of Russia, because that would only portend a larger trouble for the security, the collective security of Europe. Russia has a history of belligerence, of antagonism. So if you allow it to annex, this began with Crimea in 2014. Before you know it, Russia was sponsoring separatists in the two regions of Donetsk and Luhansk to secede from Ukraine, an independent state. So you see, Russia historically has been aggressive. So if you do not coordinate such a massive response in terms of sponsoring Ukraine to fend off that military offensive and attack from Russia, then you're opening the floodgates for more military intervention of Russia to keep on encroaching on territories of other states. Before you know it, Russia will be on the borderline with Germany. And Russia won't stop. It could go as far as they would even maybe make an attempt to annex
India,
the Isles of Britain. This is Russia for you. So the real threat for Europe is the belligerence and hostility of the Russian state. But I think Russia also is trying to resuscitate some sort of desperate attempt to recreate the imperial Russia that we knew before the emergence of the Soviet Union, before the Bolshevik Revolution, because it was an empire. So I think Putin is somewhat obsessed with that history. He sees himself as some sort of emperor. He thinks that it is his divine calling to recreate such a strong and imperial Russia in Europe, which is inconsistent with the current, world order. So once again, for me, I think the West is justified to do everything possible in its capacity and means to support an independent Ukraine to fight off the Russian invasion. But also we have to salute the steadfast courage and determination of the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian people, in the face of such impossible odds, having to fight a global nuclear superpower like Russia.
But who is suffering?
No, but you see, suffering is also relative, because I do not count it as suffering if I'm making a necessary sacrifice to protect my independence or my sovereignty. That means that's what I've got to exactly do, to maintain, a posture as a dignified but also respectable member of the world community. So I think Ukraine is doing what any other country in the exact set of circumstances ideally would do. Just like you see what we are witnessing today in Congo. So Ukraine is fighting off foreign aggression. And I think it is totally justified to continue in that pursuit.
Fair enough. Very brilliant. Seba, the more I listen to you guys, the more this becomes complex to me. But the aspect of balance of power, and Isaac is right to say that, because the world is moving away from a hegemony. We have even surpassed the bipolar system. We're now in a multipolar system, right? Where there are many different power centers. India has its own source of power. So I don't know, in this modern day and era, if we are to aspire to have balance of power, aren't there other alternatives like economic? I mean, you could have your power through an economic, angle. That power isn't only now about territorial control, but it's now about how much economy and how much exports do you have as a country. So I don't know, what are the other alternatives to achieve balance of power?
Well, I first of all need to make it clear that you probably should check whether the guys leading us are guys of this era. Before we attach a school of thought of this era onto them. But before I in-depthly respond to you, I just want to make two quick comments. And the first one is to say that I am looking here, that I am on a panel with lawyers. So when it comes to the debate of legality and legitimacy, I will leave it to them. But I just wanted to clarify that I didn't say that international law is, crooked law or not law at all. I did say that it is soft law.
It's weak.
And no, it's not weak. I said it
soft.
is soft law.
These are different
yes.
things,
And I said this because when I was serving as the youth representative of Ugandan young people to the East African community in Arusha, I got the opportunity to interface with the international law one-on-one, not in maybe studying, but in practice. And I saw the limitations that it may have. Sometimes you can't do something. If, for example, for the ESC, if you're 7 members and you don't have a unanimous vote and one person is, holding you back, you can go a whole year without executing anything. And I think she also alluded to it, that I think a lot of diplomatic means and ways have been tried to have been explored, but all attempts have been in futility. But before I go to my question, I also wanted to now just respond to his issue of the role of the fourth estate in proliferating this war. I think it would be unfair, in genuinely speaking, depending on which side you are. I find both. Anyone from the West as an oppressor, I don't care who is justified to attack who. I do care that people are losing their lives. It shouldn't happen, but I really don't care for the two people who are, maybe for lack of a better word, playing off their egos. But the role of the fourth estate, I think, in our world today, has got to be the biggest proliferator of anything. You remember in COVID-19, I can swear to you, in my personal opinion, that it is because of COVID, because of the media, that the world was shut down. I mean, we still have COVID-19 today, yet the world
no
is
longer talk
wide
about it.
open. Yeah.
You're right.
So, but it because for some time I think half of Italy we were told was dead. I don't know whether you guys were watching the same CNN I was, but there was a time where half of Italy was dead during the pandemic. So it goes without saying that hegemonic media shapes societal narratives, and this has been seen. That you have seen the level of aggression the world has given to Russians, to businessmen losing their businesses. You can speak of Abramovich in the UK, where he was forced out of his business of owning Chelsea Football Club because of what the media had portrayed Russia to have done. But today, for example, if you go and look keenly at media outlets like TikTok, you will see that there is now more keen analysis, for example, around where Zelensky has been taking his videos. Young people who are experts at green screens have started calling him out, and the response, of course, does not surprise you that the US is trying to kick TikTok out of their country. But away from that, I personally do believe that yes, the media has played a very big role. But I also think that I think we have established that these two are for Russia. These two are no. He is independent. He
I think we
is
can
for
speak
Ukraine.
for ourselves eventually.
And then I was yes, but I think what is key to note is and when we're having this debate of this was compromising the territorial boundaries and integrity and sovereignty of the other, is there are very many other cases we can look at. Hong Kong and China. We almost had a world war on our hands last year when America wanted to go to Hong Kong. When I think it was Nancy Pelosi that was about to go there, and they promised to shoot her down. So we have seen that depending on who speaks for you, whenever anything has been pro-America, it has always been painted right. If you read stories of Hong Kong and China, the relationship, and you read the same stories of, for example, Crimea and Russia, they are too different. Yet it is the same situation, or some people might argue. But now to conclude it with what could be done differently. And for me, I am sorry, our dear viewers, I am a very selfish person. I'm a Pan-African, and I care for what this world does for Africa.
So Africa isn't in isolation in all this.
That's what I'm coming to. That the impact on Africa is what should honestly interest us, because, for example, you have seen when we had the insurrections in Iran, and we had a lot of an influx of immigrants, and then the whole of Europe was locking their doors, and then suddenly something is happening to Ukraine, and oh no, all budgets are being realigned, all aid to developing countries has been needs to be revisited in order to respond to their own, which means that it clearly shows you where these people's allegiances lie. But where for us as Africa we come in, and I appreciate when you guys say that we are not living in a vacuum. But for me, I say, and I think this is a saying that very many politicians align with. Kidega, I hope that you can confirm. But politicians never allow a good conflict to go to waste. They do not. And I think Africa, for this crisis, should be a typical politician. And it has already happened. He has told you that we have BRICS already here. We have had a couple of European leaders visiting Africa. Macron was here the other day. Of course, we know he was trying to save his bank with these guys that he's pressing so hard, but he called it the African-friendly visit of France. We are having Kamala Harris. She's in Zambia. I mean, in Ghana. She's coming to Tanzania. Then go to Zambia. We are having Putin himself coming down. He's, I think, in South Africa right now. So you see that at the end of the day, everyone has recognized that there is one ally everyone will need, and that ally is in Africa. We are the ones with the bargaining power. All the chips are on our side.
Just one question is that, because I believe allies must offer something.
Yes.
So Africa, as an ally, what do you offer?
No, no. So that is what I'm telling you. That
do you
everyone
offer, knows. Military prowess. I mean, what do you offer on the world stage?
Okay, so that's exactly the issue that he was explaining as to what Ukraine probably was offering to Russia. That business that Africa gives to the international community is we are what, nearly 2 billion now.
But does Africa have a choice on what goods and Okay, on what goods we import.
Exactly.
Really?
Now we
I
do.
feel like our goods come from anywhere and everywhere.
Before we look like that, but now everyone is bringing a sumptuous deal on the table. Everyone is telling us that, okay, China and Russia are telling us we are giving you loans that are interest free.
Okay.
We are building infrastructure for you, and all we have to do is, on your roads, we just want to collect a road toll on it. You don't have, we shall pay for everything. You know what the US is offering us? We are giving you aid, but you know, it's going to be tied to 1, 2, 3, 4 things. Europe is telling us that, we are giving you all you need, but you know, you still have to use our bank and our currency to run your business. So I think that on the global scale, Africa finally has a deciding position to decide, are we going with the BRICS nations or are we going with, you know, the Western world? And we have seen that BRICS has a lot of backing. You see that majority of the Middle East is also intending to join. Already South Africa is representing us so well and showing good direction. And I think that as a continent now, I don't care where we go, but I care that we use this opportunity to have the best bargaining deals that we can ever have. That if the US is coming, or if the West is coming with all their aid that is string, probably it's an opportunity to tell them, no, you can walk away with it, or you bring it. If you say it is on health, then you do not advise on legislation we should do. Africa is united.
So you now no longer
Sure.
care for the Ukrainian people. You no longer care how that conflict is resolved. What the
Pan-African-
resolution to it is.
I think I needed to be very clear, and this is why I said I don't want to be misquoted. I said that it is unfortunate what is happening to the citizens. I do not feel for the leaders. I do not. But what I say now is we need to be typical politicians. We need to, and I think this is something that comes with leadership, that there is a point where emotions are immaterial to a conversation. And you need to see how do we move forward in the most positive direction, the most impactful direction for our people. And I think that is what African leaders should take. That if the BRICS are offering us a better deal and we have better autonomy in leadership and how we control ourselves, why not go for it?
All right, thank you. As we take a short commercial break, I want to end with Karungi. Karungi, the aspect of, for example, economic sanctions. We have seen different multinational businesses and players issue sanctions against Russia, but also the most recent sanction being from the ICC against Putin. I don't know. Does this in some way offer a solution, or it is only a spanner in the works? Like, is it going to just give room for more aggression, or you think Russia is going to take heed of such sanctions?
Thank you. There were so many deals talk. I think Sebastian is a dealer, but let me try and bring the light to the dialogue. In my opinion, one of the remedies for all this would be uplifting the sanctions, that has been imposed on Russia.
Uplifting?
So, yes, uplifting the sanctions. So there are financial sanctions, that are affecting the trade. There are economic sanctions, the airports, the visa, saga. There's so much that is happening. And if the more you press a country that is really determined to prove a point, the more it actually, continues its aggression. So for me, the ICC intervention, I feel is a little too late. There are so many economic sanctions that are still actually going to keep going. But then the reality is, I was reading and they stated that Russia is currently the second largest gas producer to Europe. And there is only going to be a year next year when Europe can survive independently of Russia's economic prowess. So for me, the economic sanctions are, it's like a whole list. If they can actually tone it down, then Russia will actually be instigated to, reduce the aggression. By the end of the day, like Sebastian said, you should remove the emotions out of play. If it's politics, it's politics. But then again, for me, I believe at the end of the day, we shouldn't forget the whole concept of humanity. Yes, because why then is the West sending aid to Ukraine? They realize the impact of aggression on civilians. Yes, there is hospitals, there are innocent civilians. So if you are unable to come to a compromise, that is through these sanctions, then you do not expect a big power like Russia to actually reduce on its attacks. The only thing that will actually loosen up will be if they are afforded, they are given, a balance or a choice to make. There are so many sanctions in place. I can't get all of them off it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'll be assisted after a commercial break. But one way to resolve conflict.
What do you make, for example, of the NATO base being where it is, just at the border of Russia? Because you're saying that the sanctions should be lifted, all right? And perhaps rightly so. But then how do you address the issue? Because you're trying to make a point for Russia that, uplift these sanctions and perhaps Russia might reconsider their position regarding aggression. But if the NATO base still exists, then even if you uplift all these sanctions, Russia will still see a threat.
I get you, but then at the end of the day, we shouldn't forget that the fact that Russia is bringing up its defense of its right to self-defense, stems from the fact that it was trying to preempt whatever aid that Ukraine was getting, due to its prior involvement with NATO. So, there's so many things that could be uplifted. The sanctions are just one of them, but there's so many factors that could actually reduce the level of aggression right now. And for me, he seemed to suggest that I'm pro-Russia, but I'm not. But I'm trying to find a nexus between politics and also preservation of humanity, international law. So in as much as it's soft, at the end of the day, we shouldn't forget that we would be hypocrites if we keep saying we are for the West, we are for Russia, but we forget that there are actually casualties at play. Yeah. So Ukraine's determination to also attack, and let it go down in history that it actually attacked Russia is good, but then it also ignores the fact that there is a civilian. No, but I think both countries, especially Ukraine, is ignoring the fact that it's getting so much sympathy and support from the international community, but it's ignoring basic international principles. Yeah, if you cannot uphold the principle of distinction, if you cannot focus on the military objectives and then keep using an I don't care attitude over you don't care if civilians are in play, then for me, Russia's right to self-defense comes in. You get? Because both nations are ignoring these principles. And I think that's why the UN cannot actually come in. That is my submission.
Well, viewers, we are due for a short commercial break. Carlos, I will begin with you. But to the viewers, I'm sure you are in either a political psychology class or a class of international relations, but whatever class you are in right now, just enjoy that class. And see you shortly after this commercial break.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
We'll be back from that short commercial break. Carlos, there is so much going on here already. But to me, two things. The role of non-state actors in all this is that we know that amidst chaos and amidst such kind of confusion, the non-state actors, like the non-government organizations, and I dare say even the transnational terrorism groups have a role to play in this. You look at Afghanistan, you look at Boko Haram, that is in Nigeria, but the actions cut across the world. You look at, for example, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, but the actions cut across
Al-Shabaab here.
Al-Shabaab, just up here. So the point is, where do non-state actors find themselves in this conflict? Should they be a part of it, Should they be a part of the solution process? But also, do they have a stake? Because you know that even countries across the globe have been infiltrated by, for example, multinational companies. Take an example of Shell. Shell is not founded here in Uganda. But if you look at Shell outlets, they're all over KFC. So such multinational companies that have penetrated different nations, do they have a role to play in such conflict resolutions?
I think to answer your question, I can just say like there are three levels of analysis of foreign policy.
Yeah.
And you need to know that the reactions of all these states in the current crisis that we are discussing comes from the policy framework that they decide to put in place. So if you're looking at foreign policy or the approaches of these states towards responding to the existing circumstance, you can look at it from an individual level, you can look at it from a statist level,
Yeah.
and then you can look at it from maybe now the national. Now that's where you bring the international companies.
Yeah.
So at an individual level, we have been talking here, but what is the personality of the person who has attacked the Ukrainians, for example?
Yeah.
Who is Putin? What motivates him as his personality? What is his academic background? What is his experience of work in foreign policy, in national policy, and all that? Is he an aggressive person? If he's so, then he practices. I don't want to go into the jargons of realism, liberalism. He's a realist-minded person. Now, where you have asked me where we include the international community, first we need to know that I pity the international community in this situation. Why should I pity them? Because their hands are tied. It's like their biggest funders. It's the ones actually investing in this war. Another question you could even wisely ask me is, where is China in all this? But I'm going to answer that question after answering the one you've asked me. The international community, for example, you're talking UN. UN has around 193 member states. Now, those member states, she aligned it very well, 5 are permanent. And each of those 5 have what we call veto power. Now, the veto power comes to play especially in times of voting. So at the UN General Assembly. And when they are voting, maybe 4 can say yes, and the other one says no, it overrules the entire decision. Now, that limits the effectiveness of the United Nations. For example, right now, countries could vote and say, what should we do to Russia? When Russia did this to in 2014,
Crimea.
in Crimea, it was tabled before the General Assembly as a debating topic. But then because Russia being a permanent member, being a veto power, it becomes a very hard resolution. So one of the biggest challenges the international community could be facing right now is the opportunity for them to come and take a side. Taking a side becomes very hard. So maybe if you're talking trade, what is the importance of maybe having a regional bloc? Imagine a situation where maybe Ukraine had joined the Eurasian. Okay, they have taken a part maybe to be, it's like East African community. You see Rwanda, DRC. Maybe a Sudan can sit them down and say, look, we are members of the East African community. Let us try to settle this amicably on a round table. But then you also say when diplomacy fails, force is applied on non-compliance. So diplomacy has failed. But then the impact would still be felt within the region because you're hampering the economic progress of the region. You're limiting the bargaining power. But now that is at economic and maybe at a regional level. So the current international community, I think their hands are tied.
No, because I don't think so. I think they're simply reluctant to take sides in what appears to be a very difficult situation. Because you'd ask yourself, if the Gulf region say that we will not export our oil to Russia or to Ukraine because they're doing ABCD, do you know the kind of impact that would have in terms of economic implications? If, for example, companies like Absa Bank, those are multinational companies, that if they chose to withdraw and say, we are going to withdraw our branch from maybe Russia, couldn't that have impact? World Vision, So the point is the non-state actors, leave alone the state actors, because we know that there is the individual point of it, there's a state, but also there are non-state actors,
Groups.
right? Yeah,
That's right.
that are, and that's why even multinational terror groups fall in. Yeah, so I don't know. I just help us paint a picture on the role of non-state actors.
I think it is this leader of Cuba. I don't know whether it was Fidel Castro or someone. Once was quoted saying, "He who feeds you controls you." And because these people still, I would still bring back the first point I brought in. Like, who is the biggest funder, for example, of the United Nations? Currently, it's still the US.
The USA.
During the time of the pandemic, I can give you this example. When the World Health Organization took so long to declare COVID-19 as a pandemic, that was an issue, a topic of debate, because China was busy influencing the World Health Organization. And under Trump administration, Trump had actually threatened to withdraw from the World Health Organization. And what did China tell World Health Organization? It's okay, the money they're giving you, we can actually fund you double. Now, that is the level of influence these countries, these individual countries, with their all power and possession they have on the international community. So at some point, taking a side becomes actually a very risky thing for them. And maybe even arriving at decision making, let's say like for the voting, we have talked of the UN system, it becomes very hard. But maybe if you're looking at it from the individual groups, how powerful are they? That is the other question you should bring.
No, and that is where you go back to September
11?
Yes, 11.
2001.
Yes. You know how Al-Qaeda brought the USA to its knees.
But
so if these terror groups, even with
Al-Qaeda.
Yeah?
It was Al-Shabaab.
So sorry.
I mean, is it? It was Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda, yes.
It was Al-Qaeda.
My question was rhetorical. Was it really Al-Qaeda?
Oh yeah, sure.
So and you see, even with their illegitimacy, they have capacity to bring governments to their knees.
The question is, actually, I think the war in Ukraine has created a very good distraction for any other players to now achieve their entire goal. For example, I would answer your question in a way that appears like I'm dodging it. I asked you, where is China in this? And are you seeing China pursuing this thing directly? China, since 1976, I think, after the demise of Chairman Mao, and now the coming to power of the CPC, the Chinese, the Communist Party. If you follow the path to development of China itself, they have been only aligning under the non-intervention policy. And the non-alignment has been their major foreign policy. But non-alignment does not mean they are not existent. So China, you've seen how they shake hands with Russia all the time. But then they do it in a certain way to convince you that they are not in it. Now, how is China coming to Africa? While these people are busy fighting the other side, they're busy exchanging, using their media to blackmail the other, China is busy here in Africa trying to extract, trying to win allies, trying to push its path to become the global superpower. And that brings me to the point of we talked of balance of power in the international system. Balance of power, we are still going to witness a balance of power that it will shift from the global west to mostly the east. Because if you have now, you're adding the Arabs, you know how much money those people have with their oil and all that possession. You're adding the power of Russia. You're adding China in it. India is actually, right now, one of the sanctions I saw they were trying to impose on India is that India still buys military weapons from Russia. So if you're buying weapons from them and she's supporting them, the only person these people have from the Arabic world is Saudi Arabia. And that's the reason why the crown prince can go on killing anyone the way they want, because America supports it.
Even him is withdrawing.
He's now, I see him shaking more hands with Putin whenever they are sitting at international events, they are seated together. I think conclusively, if I'm to make any maybe submission relating to the question you've asked me, the role played by the independent parties, I want to call them. Independent, okay, we also have state actors and non-state actors. The non-state actors in this capacity, when, like they say, when the two elephants are fighting, all you can do is you suffer as the grass, or you can by far watch and maybe swallow the dust that comes in your eyes. So this is, I think, an opportunity for them to sit and watch. And imagine you take a side right now, and then maybe at the end of the war, Russia still emerges victorious. Because we don't know how this war is going to end. It can only end. Why did Russia actually end up in the war? Because they had actually sent an ultimatum to NATO itself in a written form for NATO to promise first not to even interfere in those territories that are within its own maybe geography. So there is geopolitics that is being played here, and if NATO does not respond to this, what is the capacity of Russia and what is the level of allies that Russia is going to achieve after this? Yeah, I think this is...
Thank you. Seba, any
Yes.
course.
I don't know. I just had one concern when he said he didn't feel like maybe individuals, but I feel like corporations have a big role to play, and I actually feel that they have done some work. I've already spoken about the media, and maybe what I missed there is you still see their bias even now. Last year at around this time, they were telling us the Russian economy was at the brink of collapse. The ruble was tanking at the stock exchange boards. But today they are not telling you that banks in the US are failing terribly and that the ruble is at its record high. So I think that is one example, but it is also critical to recognize that, for example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, you saw that Apple, Amazon, almost all American and Western corporations pulled out of Russia. And of course, maybe the intention was for them to create some level of pressure within the state for citizens to rise up and call and force Putin to call it off. But looks like there are very many young, innovative people who can change KFC to DFC or to RFC out in Kenya like we do here in Uganda. But the other thing that I think is critical, and this is for still these independent corporations, is, for example, you see the role that Starlink of Elon Musk has played, where they are providing free internet to the Ukrainians. That is how you keep them connected, considering that today we are using artillery and arsenal that is very technological. You need internet, which means that, yes, people like Starlink are literally the backrock of this war, where probably you will need connectivity to fly your drones, to get imaging from the satellites and all. So certainly we have seen that independent corporations have played a critical role. Maybe from a moral standpoint is that it can be argued that whoever you think is the oppressor is not a person you should maybe keep giving your service to, because you are sort of an enabler. So certainly there is a role that has been played, but depending on where these companies are, has defined where their mother companies is, which country they come from, has defined which side they take, which again comes back to us that as Africans then, when we look closely at how these international companies and corporations interact with such situations, what do we learn from them? That tomorrow, are we going to welcome such institutions openly to do business with us, or are we going to create some level of check and balance to say that, okay, when things go south, you can't just pull out of our economy, or if you do, there have got to be some level of safeguards. Because what happened to Russia, and I will still insist, I think the only reason Russia could cushion that level of economic shock was because it is Russia. But I think that still, as Africans, we have quite a lot to learn from them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Isaac, two things from me. One is that where does this live? Because you know that at the center of good governance is justice. And at the temple of justice is the aspect of human rights. So where does all this back and forth, Russia, Ukraine, then there's the USA involved, where does this place democracy as a growing trend of governance? Does this undermine democratic principles? That's one. But two, does the USA have the moral ground or moral authority to, in fact, be the one to try and call Russia to order? When we know, or even if not evidently proven, we know of their sinister and draconian engagements across the world. So I don't know, the hypocrisy of the USA. But also, do you think Russia and USA can ever cooperate?
That's quite interesting, but let me first register a comment briefly on the role of non-state actors in the conflict. I think the current sustained and strong campaign we are witnessing of the West, trying to, through its economic might, I think trying to, make sure that a bulk of its corporations pull out of Russia. It's a coordinated and I think elaborate strategy to exert maximum economic pressure on Russia to, somewhat reconsider its position on the conflict. I think the West feels like it cannot fully engage into a full-blown military confrontation with Russia at the moment. So it's best if it can, weaken its economic pillar so that Russia comes to a point where it can no longer facilitate or sponsor its war effort in Ukraine. And also for that, my view is that it is totally justified. And it should extend, by the way, as it is being rolled out to close associates of the Russian leader, Putin, in business, but also in other jurisdictions out of Russia, like we have witnessed it. So now to the point, let me begin with your last question as to whether America can ever cooperate with Russia. America and Russia, for your information, by the way, they have a long-standing history of cooperation. Only that it is, contextual. It only manifests under certain strict parameters. So there are what we call bare minimums or irreducible minimums for either side. Where they cannot forge common ground, they just go to extreme polars. So everyone will just take their side. For example, America is a liberal democracy. They espouse principles of, democracy, good governance, respect for rule of law, human rights, free media, free speech and expression. You'll find that a stark contrast in Russia, because Russia, historically, since the emergence of the Bolsheviks, the communist, revolution, and then after the collapse of the Soviet state, it has somewhat tried to liberalize its political system, but not to what I would call the Western, orientation of democracy. So you still have some sort of, limited participation of the citizens in as far as electing representatives is concerned. But then you have
They even amended their
The
constitution.
representatives wielding full power.
you have an emperor in a president. It's an imperial presidency. Someone that manifests, the strongest, and obsessive interest in power. So, now Putin has amended that constitution. He has made it
From 2 terms to Sssegawa now.
it's now is Sssegawa. So you see, he's trying to reimagine the imperialistic
Of Stalin.
Russia, not even of Stalin,
Tsarist
the
regime.
monarch of the Tsar. You see, that is Putin's orientation. And it's at the core of each and every action he's trying to, even with respect to the Ukrainian conflict. He's reimagining a Russia that is so strong, that is so dominant, that is unassailable in the region, that can dominate the whole of Europe and compete and eventually subdue America. So, to me, I feel like as a democracy, because that's what we are in Uganda, at least in a theoretical sense. Okay? And that's what we should be actually practically, because that's what our constitution envisages, even with all its multitude of, weaknesses. But theoretically, we're a democracy. So I'm a Democrat, and I espouse, principles of liberal democracy. I feel like we should express solidarity with fellow Democrats. Ukraine has been a democratic country, I think now quite for some good time, because when the Soviet, Russia collapsed, USSR in 1991, they had a dictatorship who was closely leaning towards Russia until he was toppled. So I think this is their second democratically elected president.
Yeah.
Therefore, I feel it should be our obligation to defend democracy wherever it is, not only within our, domestic confines here in our jurisdiction, but also anywhere where people express democratic values and principle. So therefore, for me, to that extent, I feel again that the West and the USA, they are justified to intervene in Ukraine to the extent that democracy is maintained and reinforced. Because I do not know why in the 21st century someone should have the propensity to, harass. Why they should have?
We are not allowing you to say that.
Why they should have the propensity to harass and also, orchestrate that kind of violation for human rights and the basic freedoms of people, because the Ukrainians have determined their course. They have determined a future they want to live. And the future,
I think you speak for all of us.
and that future is that they want to exist in a democratic, country, a country that espouses democratic principles and values. So why should it now be contingent on, Putin's viewpoint of things, whether he actually appreciates it or not? That's where also the other debate is. So may I think we should express, if indeed we are Democrats, like we profess, it should also be the obligation, and this should come at a state level, as Uganda, to express strong solidarity with Ukraine, so that Ukraine can maintain and reinforce its democratic posture, so that we help and support Ukraine to fend off any attack that portends a risk to its democracy and the enjoyment of the fundamental freedoms and liberties of the Ukrainian people. So to me, I think the USA still has, some sort of very big window to exploit with Russia to try and resolve this conflict conclusively. For example, we've seen efforts championed by the French president, Macron. Last year, he made, I think, an abortive attempt to try and mediate by, engaging Putin. But I think the West is yet to meet the strict, but what I describe as impossible conditions that Putin is, trying to place before them as a precondition for guaranteeing and ensuring peace in Ukraine. Because if you're to look at Ukraine, this whole issue to be, resolved, it has to be chiefly in the interest of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And for me, I think there should be a set of irreducible or bare minimums. Number one, Ukraine should stand as a single, indivisible unit or state. That should be the first point. So Russia should actually cede any sort of claim on the other two separatist states, because the long strategic aim of Russia is to annex them and then make them part of the bigger Russian Federation. I hope you know. They are now trying to push for some sort of, referendum, which will now, try to create the impression.
Do they force the people who are voting?
No, but that's the reality. That's the reality on the ground, because it's now effectively under Russian control. So they can engineer that and achieve the outcome, however scandalous it is. So number one, Ukraine should exist as an indivisible, single territorial unit or state. Number two, Russia should guarantee an effective withdrawal of its forces from Ukraine, and also further give assurances that it won't take any more aggressive actions against an independent and sovereign state, that is Ukraine. Number three, we should have now independent states who can guarantee a peace process, so that all these powers can be engaged. Russia, because Russia and Ukraine, they are the principal powers to, parties to the conflict. But as we've discussed here, this conflict is so sensitive and complex because it has the interest of the rest of the other, international community owing to the geopolitical interests that underlie the conflict. So you have to somewhat, guarantee interests of the NATO. You have to somewhat guarantee interests of the European Union. Europe is afraid perpetually of Russia and its dominance. In order to guarantee Europe's security, you've got to tame or check Russia. That's the reality. So I think, number one, Russia should commit to an environment of peace and amity in Ukraine. Then we can set the necessary, foundation for framework that can aid us to broker and mediate peace to have this conflict resolved.
Wow. Karungi, do you think that underneath whatever is happening, there is an aspect of agenda setting, that countries are committing resources, committing military power and prowess, but deep down, it's all about setting an agenda that the world can abide by? But also, we know that, for example, the USA, that our good friend here describes as a democracy, has yeah, and perhaps rightly so, because if you look at USA, at least from their practices in terms of political systems, accountability, they at least portray a good level
I'm sure
of a democratic state.
I'm sure you don't believe in what you're saying.
So my question is that, still, regarding the role of the USA, this is the same country that did commit atrocities here in Africa, in Libya. So how does the same country that evaded another country tell Russia not to invade Ukraine? So that kind of double standards on the international, and perhaps there is no one to check these guys. They are too powerful, and even the UN is a pawn on their chessboard. So I don't know, just two things: agenda setting, but also USA and its double standards.
Thank you. I think I'll obviously respond to the second question first, because what is clear as day is that USA is a snake in green grass. Yeah. And I think, this side of the panel agrees with me. I agree with the concept of rule of law and democracy, but what I do not agree with is how it is done. Yeah. If we have failed as African states to actually uphold rule of law, yes, do we actually think that these powerful states, save for the United States that has tried to actually emulate the principles, can Russia forego, part of its influence in Ukraine, when it comes to democracy? Because let me give you a case in point. The Minsk Protocol, I keep referring to it because it was the first form of diplomacy that was employed, After that, it guaranteed constitutional reforms in Ukraine, and they were able to carry out local elections. But what happened is, after these elections were successful, Russia felt that it had lost that sphere of influence, yeah? So for them, they stated that the ability of Ukraine to actually hold local elections amounted to a slight violation of the Minsk Protocol. So for them, the fact that local elections were held and constitutional reforms were, amounting to rule of law, was something that instigated them to come to a conclusion that if they can actually be able to do this, then we're actually also not going to follow the Minsk Protocol, and we're going to employ force. Yeah. So rule of law is something that is very controversial when it comes to big states. It has actually failed in our small states. So I think Sebastian will pick up on his submission, but I want to disassociate myself from the fact that rule of law can be upheld in Russia. Because for them, the more influence that they have in terms of economic resources, it also has to come into force, in politics. So that is the first question.
Yeah.
What was your first question? Sorry.
The first one, The first one was about agenda setting. That is, underneath all these happenings, is there an aspect of, either setting or trying to realign the world into the communist, perspective, or is it about, progressing the world towards the capitalistic? So the agenda setting underneath, do you think there's an aspect of that?
I would like to believe so. Carlos earlier mentioned the fact that, in the long run, power will shift from the west to the east, which is actually a fact that we're starting to see. Yeah. The more that we realize that China's silence is actually a huge thing, the more would actually pay attention to the fact that Russia's hidden agenda is to actually assert its supremacy like before. Yeah. But I do not think the rationale for all this force was its initial plan. You can assert your supremacy over the world in a diplomatic manner. Yeah. And for me, that would have happened. That would not have happened if we had actually still been under Trump's regime. Yes. I know there are some people in the panel that commend Trump's leadership, and I do as well, because you realize that Biden's approach is not something that would easily resolve what is happening. Yeah. So again, the
What's
agenda.
his approach again?
No
He's
comment.
sleepy.
No, but
No, it's crippling Russia.
Trump.
I mean,
Attempting
how would Trump act any differently?
You see, Trump and Putin are realists. They will actually put to work what is ideal for for both of them. That is something Biden, in my
Biden is
opinion,
agitating the
has
guy.
failed to do. His approach is more of
He's focusing on his own interests.
Exactly.
The American interests.
Yes. So at the end of the day, you find the United States actually also trying to what is it called? Trying to focus on themselves, every man for himself. But then you have to understand Putin's perspective of all this, because at the end of the day, Europe has to realize that Russia can actually stand alone, but they cannot. Yeah. So if you do not want to fund the communist agenda, then the least you can do is pretend. I mean, they're always pretending with Africa. You get. So he can pick one.
Interesting. No, I want to bring in Carlos. Carlos, as of course you respond to the aspect of where does this leave democracy, but of course the obvious comments that were made by Council Isaac is that paint for us a picture of the human rights situation. I mean, we see them on TV, yes, but the nitty-gritties of the human rights situation there.
First of all, what is human rights itself? You see, I want always to disagree with any sort of promulgation that comes around human rights. The rights that are declared under the Universal Declaration, maybe plus all the other amendments in the different legislations in every other country, I still think they're outdated. And they are not put in place to address current issues, most of them, though some of the issues are cutting across from any other generation. For example, I can give you a crisis that exists in the current world that might not be looked at as a serious human rights issue. Climate change. Okay, we are suffering climate change and its implications. But then if you check maybe in the enforcements and the different legal or even maybe legislative systems with the human rights, such are things that are not recognized. They are recognized maybe in another way, but they are supposed to be put as they are. This is my argument always when it comes to human rights. These human rights that are enlisted, some of them are outdated. They are not addressing current issues. Now, when you talk about human rights itself, of course, we know in Ukraine there's a lot of massive violation. We even started from the time when the war just started. You saw how Africans were suffering. People are struggling to enter trains, and you are black, they push you out of it. There was racism. You're seeing loss of lives. I mean, by the way, you can never ever enjoy another right when you don't have your life. So right to life becomes the primary human right. So people are dying, properties are being destroyed, and all that, fine. But for me, I also want to look at something in a different way. You talked of the word democracy. I totally disagree with that concept in its entirety. When you talk about democracy, who was the founder? Or who are the people who came out with the concept of democracy? It is the Americans, right? Or the West, or the liberals. If you know your history very well, during the Cold War politics, West versus East, it was communism versus capitalism. Communism, on the other side, they were promoting an ideology of welfare state, and that is what Gaddafi was practicing here in Africa, in Libya, because welfare state qualifies you to be actually maybe you receive certain favors from the government by the mere fact that you're a citizen. But democracy came as a Belfast, maybe as an icing sugar to the concept of capitalism. Because the other side, these people were bringing communism and said maybe ownership is in the hands of the government, or in the state, but then they help in allocation of resources. Whereas these people said, no, let's be in the hands of the individuals. So how does it now become an interesting or an appealing thing for every government? What was happening during that time? 47, we're talking 47 to 1991. African countries were gaining independence. We were weak. We wanted to just jump on anything that can help us to, become strong governments. So it's either you choose democracy and its principles versus with its capitalism, or you run to communism with its welfare state policy. So that is why the people, when the Soviet collapsed because of its economic stagnation, remember China left Soviet Union around 1971. So the Soviet Union became economically weak. They could no longer fund their entire maybe ideology all over the world. That is how all these countries in Africa started adopting to capitalism. They started adopting to democracy. That is how we are here at democracy level. But the question is, does democracy fit in an African setting? When they were formulating it, was it formulated to best fit the entire global community, or it was best fitted for the US system itself? Because you look at the implementation, the enforcement of democracy itself. So that is where I disagree with democracy. So it's wrong for you to think Russia not practicing democracy is actually a wrong thing. China, if you read the Chinese path to development itself, the Chinese path to development tells you they have actually thrived around communism. Right now, we are discussing them as a potential to a global superpower. But where is the democratic values in it? The Chinese Communist Party itself, it's like a dominant factor there. There is even no question of debate. Let's say we're talking voting. The chairman of the Chinese, the CPC, becomes like the leader of the party. You've just seen Xi lately being remandated into power. But then, have they failed to manage the country to where it is? So we can follow something blindly, but then, at the end of the day, you should see the applicability of that concept that you're trying to bring. So for me, with democracy, if Uganda decides to come out with its own principles today and say this is what leads us to development, so long as there are other values that I cannot really agree with, of course, human rights, of course, disrespect of maybe the different diversions within the society. We are living in a diverse world. We cannot focus on things that lead us to danger. Maybe there's a question you ask him as I conclude. You ask him whether there are grounds for cooperation. There is a lot of grounds for cooperation. Actually, during World War II, if you know your history well, these two were actually allies. And being allies, it led us to a unipolar system in the sense that, okay, bipolar, because when the World War ended, there were two strong nations that remained, the Soviet and the US. So when these people went into that battle of the Cold War and etc., it led us to a unipolar system. So the unipolar system became a byproduct of the bipolar system. But now, countries have seen that America has outgrown its ego to start telling us what to do, to start telling us how to behave. So there is need to balance up, and that's why you're seeing the Chinas and the Japans of this nation. So if you're talking about maybe trying to create a system that works for all of us, maybe with respect of territorial sovereignty, respect of the territorial integrity of every country, with respect of human values, and also while America preaches to us how to behave, they should also bear in mind that we hail from different societies. There are certain things that we condone, and there are certain things that we cannot accept. So democracy in its entirety is a hoax because it only fits the proponents, so the founders of the entire structure. But if you try to create an international, maybe sort of an approach that countries can adopt unanimously, that can give them respect. You see China, what China is doing, they have come out with, you go and interest yourself with this council, read something to do with a shared future for humanity. That is the Chinese concept of development. They say shared future for humanity does not mean America wakes up and tells us what to do, does not mean America only benefits from the weak nations, does not mean you become strong only by building new powers based on the weakness of others, but you're trying to create a shared future where everyone benefits. So to me, I don't believe in democracy. I won't answer any question about democracy.
Yes, Isaac.
Yes, with your permit, I just want to react. So I want to understand, are you a Democrat? Do you profess democracy?
You want me to answer it in a way of saying yes or no?
Anyhow, I just want to understand if you're a
I
Democrat
don't
or not.
believe in the concept of democracy, but I believe in the concept of having a moral practice in the essence of governance.
What's that? Because I want to know how then that translates into a realistic, some sort of political structure to administer governance in a country, for example, as an alternative to democracy. Because when you read the dictates of our constitution today in Uganda, they state that we are a democracy. So if you're saying that we should now, leave that path and pursue your course, realistically, what would we have as an alternative?
Because I think my issue with morals is that you then leave it to the masses and whims of the office bearer or of the, there are floodgates for arbitrary.
That's a
It
fertile ground
depends
for
on
anarchy.
Yeah,
Eventually.
because if
Fertile
you want
ground,
to,
Yes, actually, because now
rely on someone's
if everyone
moral
is
conscience.
exactly,
Let me answer
that's
your
also
question this
relative.
way. I don't want you people, very elite panel we have here, to focus on a crumb work sort of approach. I call it crumb work because this is what you're meant to believe, that it's the only way out. You
No,
get?
that's not what I said.
I'm answering you. So, what has made other countries who don't believe in such values develop? For example, I've given you already. We had Cuba before. We're having China right now in its
And now
path
those
to
are
development.
communists.
Yeah, leave alone it. And that does not mean whether you practice communism or you practice any other thing, you can't become a developed country. I would not mind an international community that comes to formulate a strategy that works for all, borrowing ideas from communism or whatever you want to call it, borrowing ideas from democracy, but not to restrict that democracy is the only path to development.
But
You're giving an example of
isn't
Uganda.
democracy a Greek concept?
Demos.
It
It originates
is.
from two words.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Okay?
But also, let me just clarify in conclusion. I think he says that he's an advocate for the respect and promotion of human rights and good governance.
Those are democratic principles.
Exactly. So all I want to, advance is that some of those things that you strongly advocate for, they are tied to an environment that respects and promotes democracy. So if you were to take away, because those are what you would call essentially benefits that accrue out of a democratic political order. So if you were to take away the principle of democracy, then you wouldn't enjoy.
Do you tell me monarchies practice democracy?
Certainly.
Do they?
Yes.
In
For
what
example,
capacity?
they can, as a hybrid. The UK is a monarchy. So is Spain. So is Netherlands. But all those are
What capacity?
democracies.
Do they decide? Do they
Strong
determine?
democracies. So is Belgium.
Yeah.
But they are strong democracies. So all I'm saying, whatever system we agree to, so long as we do not take away the sacred principle that is democracy, and that speaks to the autonomy of an individual, first and foremost, to determine.
So what do you make of the countries that have arrived to where they are, minus using the principles of democracy, as you would assert?
Okay.
All I'm saying is that I do not. I commend their progress, but I commend it, but I do not subscribe to the school of thought with respect to the political course that they have. Because, for example, China, yes, we commend it for its rapid economic growth.
Is it bad?
But it's an environment that does not respect basic human rights
My
and
brother,
freedoms.
sorry to answer
So,
this, but myself,
I, for example, for one, I wouldn't imagine myself living in such an environment. That's why I am a strong and
Isaac,
ardent advocate
Councillor Isaac,
for democracy.
I'm a student.
In as much as I would want to progress economically, I would want to do that in an environment
Not at the expense
where my
of
liberties,
rights and
and
liberties of
freedoms
people.
are respected.
I'm
and
a
promoted.
student in China right now, okay? China Foreign Affairs University. That is my current university. And in China, if you go to China, actually, if you want to call it brainwashing, the citizens of China typically believe in their government and in their approach. And they are actually the ambassadors of their approach to the rest of the world. This is something I can tell you from life experience. If you want to argue, go and find out. But
Okay, do you think Rwandese believe in Kagame?
I do believe.
They actually do.
They do,
They do, right?
They go through the same democracy that he advocates for.
Do they believe in him as a matter of choice?
I think so, because the same democracy.
Majority of them. Majority of them.
That's a good
Alternative.
question.
You see, because the Chinese people believing in their system, do they have an option?
Yes, they
Anyway.
do.
Which one?
Actually, if you study, one of my current course units is about the Chinese Communist entire practice. And if you study it very well, you even realize that in the same system, there is that element of democracy. But for them, their democracy is from a communist perspective, from Karl Marx. If you read Karl Marx very well, the word dictatorship is used in Karl Marx, but does not mean dictatorship in a way of you controlling people in a harsh way, the way Americans describe dictatorship. Dictatorship in Karl Marx simply means you actually enforce whatever you believe in your society, regardless of the situation that comes. You believe in it. It's in a way of advocating for it. So democracy, in the other side of the West, they try to make people who practice something that is not similar to what they practice a very bad thing, which is not true. If you go to China itself, if you go to other countries that don't practice democracy, you find the citizens have the consensus to believe in their own system, and it has led them to where they are. They are now here supplying us Africans, but do you know that at one point they were poorer than us? So I think to follow path to development in only one way is a wrong way. That's a crumb work.
I
Okay,
think we are
let us
confusing
wrap this up.
two things.
I find Carlos a bit controversial.
He seems to
He
tie
seems to-
economic progress
To
I think first the precondition that you eliminate democracy, that when you eliminate the concept of democracy,
That is how
then
you
you stand
start
a
to
better
understand.
chance
I believe it is
at
my time
economic
now.
okay,
at economic
let's begin to pick
development.
parting shots, and I'll begin with you, Seba. Your parting shots, then
All right.
I will get the gentleman.
I guess I will have a minute also because I
Yeah,
didn't
please.
have a plenary session, and mine is not going to talk about Marxism. I am also not going to talk about benevolence dictatorship. I'm going to talk about democracy, but not in the perspective that we were going through. Just that Council Isaac was rallying support for Ukraine, and his argument was that we should support democratic people. Yeah, as Democrats, first of all, identifying Uganda as a democratic country, the NRM government would be proud, very proud. But when we come to the issue of democracy itself, personally, I take a stand that democracy is very subjective. That even the gatekeepers, the Americans, are talking about Trump, nearly refused to give up power because he felt he was rigged. So when you look at democracy in itself, you might not want, for you who are watching us and are convinced by Council's eloquence, you might not want to take that as the yardstick for you to throw all your weight behind a country because they are democratic. The other thing I wanted to address is the geopolitical environment that Ukraine and Russia find themselves in. And I want to say clearly that I don't think that we are looking to see the situation escalate to have third parties intervene, and we have seen this in the same environment when we had the Rohingya in Myanmar, the ethnic cleansing that was happening there. You remember that NATO tried so much to go and invade, but it couldn't because of how many people were silent, like he says, loudly silent, like China is at the present, which probably is a good thing for the world, that at least we are going to see some powers stayed And I personally am not willing to see what nuclear weapons can do. And I'm excited to see that maybe the geopolitical situation there guarantees that we may not see a world that looks like that. But in the parting shots, I still will insist that if you are African and you care about Africa, I do not think that you should be crying for people dying in Ukraine. And notice that both Ukrainians and Russians are dying. I don't think you should. And these are my reasons. That first of all, when you do, okay, now I feel bad. I'm going to look like I'm addressing Council Isaac. But when you do claim that you are feeling for those people, then you are the same person who has been quiet about all the other atrocities and wars that have been happening. Actually, currently, Palestine and Israel have been going at it. Those guys are woken up by missiles, not even alarms like Kiev. They are woken up by live ammunition, and you have never said a word. We go to everywhere that atrocities have been. Today we are having, when, for example, Council Isaac tells you that follow democracy and the West and its democratic principles. Today we are having French people on the streets because Macron increased 2 years. He touched it in the context of Ugandans will get it. He touched the constitution to increase his stay, and how he did it was the most interesting thing for a Democrat. You will want to hear this. He suspended Parliament and then passed the law. That's what he did. So when I talk about subjectivity, this is what I'm saying, that until it is serving you, it is never a good idea.
True.
Yeah, that's why, for example, you see that Macron will tell you that I can suspend Parliament because the constitution allows it. But if anyone else would do it, then you will see the full power of NATO coming to those countries. But in conclusion, this is what I say. But look here, Africa is at a place where it is the perfect time to be this continent. Why? That first of all, we are more focused. As a continent, we have decided through our General Assembly at the AU that we are now going to be very deliberate about our growth. We have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and area. In practice, by the way, Kenya here started the export under the AfCFTA last year on 1st January 2021. No, the other year. So I am saying that we are in a place where we are strategically placed and psychologically placed as a continent to move forward towards our growth. And then this situation, however sad as it may be, gives us a unique opportunity of cherry picking what we want from these partners. And that gives us an opportunity to say, okay, that whoever has been having democracy and social baggage coming with their aid, maybe it is time for us to, revisit that conversation, yeah? Realign our interests and see whether they fall right with you. It is also time to say that, okay, the brisk people, when they are coming, what are they offering today? We have seen that already Russia and China have been rallying the Middle East to come through. As Africa, do we think that Arab money is oil money is where we want to go? We have also seen that some of the things that, for example, the BRICS nations are offering us as a continent is access to energy that we have not had access to. We know, for example, we are in Uganda and President Museveni has been an ardent supporter, and actually he insisted that Uganda is going to have nuclear energy, not the weapons, the energy. And this is a principle that the West has stood against. Yet, the BRICS nations are telling you that no, if you want this, you can have it. Yeah. So I think that it gives us as Africans a unique opportunity to decide exactly how are we going through with progression. And today we tell you that a lot of decisions have been made on our behalf without our say. And now that we are on the table on our terms, I think that we should make the most of it. Of course, when I say we should make the most of it, I'm not referring to you, our good viewers. I am just referring to our leaders, that I believe that you people put in power. So if you can get a call your president, call your representative, tell them where you think we should be in this leadership structure. I am still a believer that if every citizen was an active participant in the leadership and governance of our country, that then we shall maybe have the utopia of a democracy that you want. That's why, and Kidega will tell you everywhere we go, I keep insisting that young people should ensure that they never lose touch with their leaders. Whether you believe in them or not, make sure that whenever they are making decisions, your voice has been heard.
Carlos,
Yes.
could you use the next 40 seconds to give us your parting shots?
Wow, that's a short one, but I'll try to. First, I think let's look at recommendations. What do we think should happen? One, I think Russia should have some ceasefire in this situation, because we are putting life of the victims at stake. We are having so many implications all over the world. You see the economic crisis that we have, the inflation level, the prices, and etc. But also, these nations that are players in it should focus on looking at common grounds. We're talking security, global security. We have international concerns that could be very vital for every country to focus on. We're talking terrorists, okay? These are international concerns. We're talking climate change. I gave that example before. So these issues, if they can focus on such issues that affect us beyond boundaries, it could be a platform for us to start realizing that there can be peace beyond our egos, beyond our different interests and strategic areas that we want to focus on. However, I also still want to conclude by saying the West should stop being hypocrites, and they should stop being teaching people what they should do. They should respect people's values, and they should also as well recognize that there is no need for having a superpower, but we all need to have progressive world where everyone can equally benefit. I think this is what I can only say.
Yes, Isaac, your last words in 40 seconds.
Thank you, Moses. For the record, let me state once again, as a Democrat and a pacifist, I denounce in very strong terms Russia's continued over-aggression on Ukraine. And I think that it's high time that the rest of the world collectively, including Uganda, by the way, at the state level, took the conscious decision to express solidarity with the Ukrainian people, because their plight is not and should not be an isolated case. I also consciously advance the view that democracy, whereas it's not the perfect, political system, but in comparison with all the other alternatives, it stands out as the one that can best guarantee, sustained, equitable contribution of all human beings to their general well-being and good governance. Therefore, I want to urge the Ugandan people, especially the youth, to be very active, participants in democratic processes, to ensure that we have good governance, because it's only through good governance that is going to guarantee, or like they put it nowadays, secure our future. There is no any other way, honestly, because the other way will in the long term only, result into anarchy. Therefore, once again, I want to commend the Center for Constitutional Governance for making these facilities possible, so that we can have this kind of discourse, which I believe will go a long way, contributing to the good and democratic governance of our country. Thank you once again.
Karungi, you have the last words on the show.
40 seconds or?
No, 1 minute. Made an exception.
Thank you. Dear viewers, I will sum it up by re-emphasizing today's topic, which was premised on understanding global cooperation amidst the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And I would like to stay a neutral party in whatever has been discussed. However,
Too late.
We already know your side.
You're too invested.
however, I would love to conclude with, agreement with Sebastian's statement that democracy is subjective. I don't want us to deviate from the fact that international law imposes jus cogens. Yes, the same way democracy is a norm or is a concept, is the same way there are compelling norms that our member states should actually abide with. So I do not think it is right for a person, for an individual, to state that respect for human rights is a subset of democracy. Yes, you two seem to agree, but I believe that I believe that human rights respect and freedoms is a standalone, because it is a norm that international law intended to be mandatory. Yes, so the absence of basic human rights, the absence of principles that govern terrorism and all that, would undermine the concept of international law. So it is my final submission that as an international community, like Carlos stated, we are at a loss of what to do, but we need to capitalize on the role of the media, because where the wind blows is where the two states at war can actually fend towards. So in my conclusion, I would like to believe that there is so much that could be done to actually avoid the escalation of the war. There's still diplomatic means that can be deployed to counter this war. Thank you.
Yeah, subtle diplomacy. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Karungi, Seba. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you very much for spending the time to be on this week's episode of the Youth Roundtable. Well, I don't want to spoil any of that. Just take it in, process it, and make sense of it. See you next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.